A single line on paper can outlive empires. It can divide communities, redirect history, and quietly shape the lives of millions who never agreed to it. This line was drawn more than a century ago by colonial officials who never walked the land it crossed. And once the ink dried, it became permanent. At the beginning of the 20th century, much of Southeast Asia existed not as independent nations, but as territories administered by European colonial powers. Borders were not drawn to reflect culture, history, or geography. They were drawn to make control easier. Clear lines on paper mattered more than complex realities on the ground. On the land itself, life followed much older patterns. Dense jungle, steep mountains, and scattered villages shaped movement and trade. People crossed ridges, paths, and valleys freely. Political borders had little meaning here because for centuries, none had existed in the modern sense. Colonial surveyors worked with limited tools and incomplete information. Large sections of terrain were never fully measured. Assumptions filled the gaps. Straight lines were drawn because they were easier to defend, even when the land beneath them was anything but straight. One place would come to represent everything this system ignored. Preah Vihear Temple sits atop a dramatic cliff along what would later become a contested border. Built more than 1,000 years ago by the Khmer Empire, it predates modern states, modern maps, and modern disputes. When French colonial officials finalized their maps, the temple appeared on the Cambodian side of the borderline. This placement ignored access routes and local use that pointed towards Siam, now Thailand, but the map was printed, distributed, and treated as authoritative. And in international politics, printed facts carry enormous weight. At the time, Siam did not formally object to the map. That silence would later become decisive. In international law, what you fail to contest can be interpreted as what you accept. A detail that seemed minor in the early 1900s would later determine sovereignty decades later. As colonial rule collapsed, new nations emerged across Southeast Asia. But borders remained frozen in place. Redrawing them risked opening disputes everywhere at once. Stability was chosen over correction. The same colonial lines were copied onto new national maps, unchanged. Over time, the border around Preah Vihear became more than a technical issue. It became a symbol of national pride and historical grievance. Military patrols increased, checkpoints appeared. The line on paper now shapes daily life on the ground. In 1962, the dispute reached the International Court of Justice. The court did not rule on fairness, terrain, or access. It ruled on documents, specifically the colonial map and Thailand's earlier failure to object to it. The case was decided on paper, not geography. The court affirmed Cambodia's sovereignty over the temple. The border itself remained unchanged. Decades later, in 2013, the ruling was reaffirmed regarding the surrounding area. The original line held firm, exactly as it had for more than a century. Legal rulings resolved jurisdictional disputes, but they did not erase the underlying tension. Periodic standoffs and diplomatic strain continued. Maps can settle courtrooms, but they cannot erase memory, emotion, or national identity. The temple itself remains largely unchanged. Stone walls, stairways, and towers endure as they always have. What changed was not the structure, but the meaning placed upon it by borders drawn long after its construction. Across the world, many borders share this origin. Lines drawn quickly, often imperfectly, then locked in place by international recognition. Once acknowledged, borders become extraordinarily difficult to revise without destabilizing entire regions. Borders feel permanent. but many are simply decisions that were never revisited. This border never moved because moving it would mean admitting it was wrong, and the world rarely redraws its mistakes. Comment, like, and subscribe for more Story Unpacked.